The first time he stole from me, I wanted to break his jaw. The second time, I wanted to kiss him. In the cutthroat world of music, betrayal was a familiar drumbeat. But nothing could have prepared me for the way Ethan Carter swaggered into my life guitar slung over his shoulder, that irritatingly smug grin etched on his lips, and my song, blasting out of his speakers as if he had written it himself. It was supposed to be my big break. I'd spent months in that studio, drowning in stale coffee and cigarette smoke, fingers aching from playing chords until the skin split. Every lyric had been ripped out of me like a confession. Every note shaped from nights I couldn't sleep because all I could hear was music in my head. And yet, when the label execs gathered to hear my track, it wasn't my voice they play it was his. Ethan's smooth baritone, wrapped around the melody I had bled for. I hated him. God, I hated him with the kind of fire that could burn a man alive. But hate has a way of twisting, folding in on itself until it looks suspiciously like desire. The night it all started, New York City was buzzing the way it always does, neon lights painting the wet streets like a kaleidoscope. I was packing up my guitar in the cramped studio when Ethan strolled in, acting like he owned the place. He leaned against the doorframe, that golden hair catching the fluorescent glow, and tossed me a look that made my stomach tighten in a way I refused to acknowledge. "You're not bad, Monroe," he said, his voice dripping with the kind of charm that could sell lies as easily as songs. "But maybe next time you should write something worth stealing." The audacity of him. My hands clenched into fists around my guitar case. I wanted to lunge at him, slam him against the wall, scream until his smirk disappeared. Instead, I spat out, "You're a fraud, Carter. One day, everyone's going to see you for what you are." For a moment, his smirk faltered. Just for a second. And in that second, I caught something else in his eyes, something raw, unguarded. But then it was gone, replaced by the arrogant tilt of his chin. "Maybe," he said softly, almost too softly, "or maybe you'll see me for who I really am before anyone else does." I didn't know what the hell that meant, but it haunted me. The weeks that followed were war. Every time I booked a studio session, Ethan somehow ended up in the room next door, strumming his guitar loud enough to bleed through the thin walls. Every time I thought I had nailed a verse, he would show up with his polished grin and a version of my words that sounded better, infuriatingly better. And every time we crossed paths, our fights sparked like gasoline meeting flame sarcasm, shouting, insults so sharp they cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Yet underneath it all there was a pull, a dangerous, magnetic pull. I noticed it the night we were forced to share a late session. The producer had double-booked us, and neither of us wanted to back down. We ended up in the same room, instruments scattered, tension so thick it was hard to breathe. I told myself I wouldn't look at him, but my eyes betrayed me, tracing the curve of his jaw, the way his lips pursed when he was lost in thought, the veins in his hands when he pressed into the strings of his guitar. At some point, the fighting gave way to silence. The kind of silence that hums with something unsaid. And then, without realizing it, two were playing together. His guitar weaving into my chords, my voice carrying over his harmony. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. It worked so perfectly it scared me. When the last note faded, he looked at me with something vulnerable in his eyes, something I wasn't ready for. "See," he whispered, almost like a confession. "We sound better together." I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell him to go to hell, to grab my things and storm out. Instead, I stayed frozen, heart racing, torn between anger and an ache I couldn't name. And that was the beginning of the end. Or maybe the beginning of something else entirely. The rivalry didn't stop, it only grew sharper. Fiercer, but now it carried an undertone neither of us could ignore. Every insult was a dare. Every glare lingered too long. Every time his shoulder brushed mine, sparks shot through me like an electric current I couldn't control. I told myself it was hate. Pure, unfiltered hate. But late at night, when I closed my eyes, I couldn't stop seeing his. The storm between us reached its breaking point the night of the showcase. The label had decided to pit us against each other, same stage, same crowd, same chance at proving who deserved the spotlight. It was cruel, deliberate, and the perfect way to exploit the tension everyone whispered about behind closed doors. I remember pacing backstage, my palms slick with sweat, my throat dry despite the bottle of water I kept chugging. Out on the floor, I could hear the murmur of executives, the shuffle of industry insiders who came to sniff out the next big thing. This was supposed to be my moment, the one I had fought for since I was a kid scribbling lyrics in the margins of my notebooks. But all I could think about was him, Ethan. He stood across from me, tuning his guitar like he hadn't a care in the world. But I knew him better now. I knew that his confidence was a mask, one he wore so tight it sometimes cut into him. And when his eyes flicked up and met mine, I saw the fear, the need, the longing. It mirrored mine so perfectly that my chest ached. When they called his name, the world seemed to shrink around me. He walked onto that stage, every step deliberate, every movement smooth, and then he sang. God, did he sing? His voice poured out like liquid fire, pulling the crowd into the palm of his hand. And all I could think was how unfair it was that I both hated and loved him in that moment, how desperately I wanted him to succeed even if it meant I would lose. Then it was my turn. I stepped into the spotlight, guitar heavy in my hands, and for a terrifying moment, I froze. The audience blurred, the lights burned too bright, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat. But then I saw him, Ethan, standing in the wings watching me, not with rivalry in his gaze, not with smug triumph, but with something soft, something that steadied me. So I played. I played like my life depended on it, like every heartbreak and betrayal and sleepless night had been leading here. And when my voice broke on the chorus, I didn't fight it. I let it crack, raw and human, because maybe that was the point. By the time I finished, the crowd was on their feet, and I realized I wasn't empty anymore. I was full of music, of fight, of something I didn't want to name. The showcase ended in chaos. The execs whispered, the votes split, the verdict unclear. They couldn't decide who had won, who was better, who deserved the crown. And maybe that was the real answer. Neither of us had to. Later that night, I found Ethan alone in the empty studio, strumming absent-mindedly on his guitar. He didn't look up when I walked in, just muttered, "Congrats. You were incredible out there." I laughed, bitter and soft. "You were better." Finally, he looked at me, really looked. And then, like all the walls he'd spent years building couldn't hold any longer, he whispered, "I don't care about winning, Monroe. I just wanted you to see me." The words hit me harder than any punch ever could. My chest tightened, my throat closed, and for the first time since this whole mess began, I let myself feel everything I'd been running from. I crossed the room before I could think twice. My guitar clattered to the floor, my hands reached for him, and when our lips crashed together, it was less a kiss and more a confession. Angry, desperate, trembling but real. He tasted like salt and smoke, like every sleepless night we'd spent throwing daggers at each other. And yet it was the sweetest thing I'd ever known. When he finally pulled back, breathless, he pressed his forehead to mine. "We could be unstoppable," he murmured, "if we just stop fighting and start this." I didn't trust my voice, so I kissed him again. The weeks that followed weren't perfect. We still fought, God, did we fight? But the fire had changed. It wasn't about breaking each other anymore. It was about pushing, challenging, making the other better. We started writing together, our sounds blending until the line between mine and his disappeared. The songs were alive in ways neither of us could have created alone. And when the label came knocking, demanding to know who they should sign, we gave them no choice. We signed as a duo. Our first track hit the charts faster than either of us imagined. But the real victory wasn't the fame or the tours or even the money. It was walking into the studio every morning and seeing him there, messy-haired, grinning, handing me a cup of coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sometimes I thought back to the beginning, to the boy who stole my song and nearly broke me. I should have hated him forever. Instead, I found the only person who could match me beat for beat, word for word, heart for heart. One night, after a show in Los Angeles, we ended up on the rooftop of the hotel, the city sprawling beneath us like a restless sea of light. Ethan leaned against me, head on my shoulder, and whispered, "Funny how it all started with me stealing from you." I laughed, tugging him closer. "Yeah, you stole a song, but somehow, you ended up giving me a whole damn future." And as the stars blinked above us, I realized the truth I had fought so hard to deny. Sometimes love doesn't arrive gently. Sometimes it comes crashing in, disguised as rivalry, sharp as betrayal, only to reveal itself as the only thing that could save you. He had stolen my hit, but in the end, I had stolen his heart too. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest song we would ever write. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with the latest videos.